Good morning. Well, here we are at number 3, Holloway. Oh, there was so much research done into this book, Holloway Prison. I was actually, I got to know one of the prison officers in doing some research for this, and I was actually invited to visit Holloway Prison. Unfortunately, or fortunately, not the original one, which of course was demolished in the 1970s, but the modern one, which is also, of course, closed now. But I went to twice. I went to the modern prison, and I was escorted round and took photographs, and I can honestly say that over the course of writing about Edith Thompson and Ruth Ellis and for this fictitious character, Miriam, I've amassed probably the most comprehensive series of photographs and plans for Holloway Prison ever. In fact, I've been many people from TV and publishing companies have asked me for my comprehensive help because of the amount of work that I've got. I think I've got over 500 or 600 photographs and plans of the old building itself that was built by Bunning in the 19th century. So I know quite a lot about the old Holloway Prison. It was a monstrous place, really, really monstrous place. And it was interesting because on my second visit, I was, all of a sudden there was, the bells rang, and there was suddenly a complete lockdown, and I was not allowed to leave. There I was in a woman's prison, and I was not allowed to leave, and it was quite a surreal experience. I don't know, to this day, I don't know why there was a lockdown, but it was interesting because one moment one would be walking along the corridor, and then suddenly one would be come across these enormous steel gates. It was very surreal. But anyway, I was not allowed to leave for, I think it was about an hour and a half that I was locked in Holloway Prison. It was surreal. I can only barely imagine what it must have been like to be locked away in prison, and cannot possibly imagine what it would have been like to have been locked away in 1939 as an actual prisoner. And even more so for somebody like Edith Thompson to be under sentence of death in 1921. That's mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. Just beyond my comprehension. Anyway, that's the subject of my second and third books, which are already on here. A Life Lived and The Following Years. Anywho, I don't know, not many people know this, but I was actually in prison once, 1974, for something I never did, by the way. I was, well, this is going on a bit, isn't it? I was sitting in a pub, and I fancied something to eat. So I said to my friend, Steve, who had a car, I said, I want some chicken and chips, Kentucky Fried Chicken and chips, which was next door. So I said, I don't fancy eating it in front of everybody because, it's greasy and stuff like that. So I said, do you mind if I sit in your car, which was in the garage next door? And he said, no, fine, here's the keys. So I went and got my chicken and chips, and I sat in the carriage, and I sat in the car, and I no sooner had sat in the car when the car door opened and a hand grabbed me, and he said, son, you're nicked. Turned out the car was nicked. So down I was taken down Ilford police station and charged with stealing a car, held overnight, taken to Brixton police station the next morning. Where was it? I was charged the next morning at Ilford, remanded for 9 days in Brixton police station, in Brixton. 9 days, it was 1974. 9 of the worst days of my life. My glasses were taken away. I was hit by a warder because I wouldn't eat. Suffering incredible panic attacks. I mean, goodness me. I was not a strong kid. Talk about PTSD, it's upset me now just thinking about it. And anyway, after 9 days, I got taken back to court. Steve had owned up. And I was set free. They said, you can go. No apology. No nothing. 9 terrible days. Brixton in 1974 was not a good place. I couldn't eat, so they put me in the medical wing. A man hung himself 2 doors down, 2 cells down. There was a paedophile in there. But the man I was put in with, he was a nice chap, and we spent the time just talking and playing chess, I think. Can't remember much now. My mother came to visit me. Bless her heart. She's very upset. Anyway, God knows what it was like for those women in prison. Maybe that set the scene for me writing about it all. Anyway, here it is, Holloway. What it was like to be in it in 1939. I won't say enjoy. It's a powerful piece.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something incredibly personal. It's a really brutal journey, actually.
It is. We have these sources that chronicle one specific year in the life of a woman named Miriam Baxter.
And she was a mother, a wife, and then just suddenly a prisoner.
Mm-hmm.
And the crime that got her there, it seems almost unbelievable today.
We're talking about the calculated theft of 7 shillings worth of baked goods from her employer.
Just 7 shillings. And that one small act of desperation, it earned her a full 12-month custodial sentence in His Majesty's Holloway House of Detention.
Right.
We're starting this deep dive in January 1939, and you have to remember, this isn't just a story of crime and punishment. It's a really detailed look into the psychological landscape of incarceration right on the eve of the Second World War.
She goes in as Mrs. Miriam Baxter.
And she very quickly becomes inmate 5678.
So our mission here is to really understand the sheer weight of that mistake.
Yeah.
We need to analyze how she survived a year inside this place that was nicknamed, pretty brutally, the castle.
And we want to see what the systemic, architectural, and emotional pressures of incarceration in 1939 reveal about how society looked at desperate women.
Yeah.
What is the actual lasting cost of a small mistake? Okay, let's get into this.
Let's do it. We're looking at a narrative that's, while it's deeply personal, it also acts as this powerful time capsule. It captures Miriam's trauma, for sure, but also the real desperation of working-class London just before the war.
So the sources, they drop us right into the atmosphere of the magistrate's court. It's cold. It's stark.
Yeah.
Miriam is sitting on this hard bench. It's bolted to a stone floor in just a bland, square holding cell. And she's fiddling with her wedding ring, just watching this, I guess, relentless stream of women being processed and taken way up these echoing stone stairs she can't even see.
In that waiting area, the silence is just punctuated by the sound of heavy doors, distant shouting. The whole thing is designed to make you feel absolutely powerless.
Of course.
Her lawyer, a Mr. Entwistle, he'd already done what he could. He was, preparing her for what he thought was the usual outcome for a first-time nonviolent offense. Maybe a month.
A slap on the wrist.
A slap on the wrist, maybe a short lecture. The only mitigating factor he could even offer was that she had sick children.
And what makes this so tragic is that the theft was, yes, it was systematic, but it was born purely out of this financial collapse. She wasn't some career criminal.
Not at all.
She was the assistant manager at Pither's Bakery in Stratford. And for about 4 months, she had this routine. Every Thursday morning, she'd send her 8-year-old son, Peter, to collect some specific loaves and cakes.
The total value, again, was just 7 shillings. This was not about lavish living. It was about feeding her family.
So how did she get caught?
Well, the scheme fell apart when the owner, Mr. Pithers, noticed discrepancies in the accounts. The manager, a Mr. Webb, had been flagging them. So Pithers spent about a month just covertly observing the shop.
Oh.
And when Peter came in that last time, the child was questioned. And suddenly, the simple act of a mother trying to feed her kids becomes this huge judicial scandal, all because a child was involved.
The pace, which had been so slow and agonizing, it suddenly just picks up speed. She hears a shout, "This way, Baxter, shake a leg, I have a home to get to."
Right.
And she's rushed up these worn stone steps. The sources describe them as being kind of hollowed out in the middle from millions of feet. And she's in court number 3. She grabs the thick brass rail in front of her, and she pleads guilty.
And this is where you see the courtroom's cruelty, really. The sources are so clear about this. The judge's outrage was not focused on the 7 shillings.
No.
That was basically negligible. It was all about the involvement of her son, Peter.
The central magistrate looks down over his spectacles, which is just such a powerful image, and he condemns her. He calls her behavior appalling because it showed a complete disregard for the love he no doubt has for you as a mother.
It's an incredibly paternalistic judgment, isn't it? It just completely overlooks the desperation that forced her to involve her son in the first place.
It frames her economic failure as a moral one, a failure of motherhood, which in 1939, that was often seen as a far worse crime than petty theft.
It was. So the expected month, it just vanishes. She's handed the full 12 months. And then right after that comes the shock that really defines her entire experience.
She sees Raymond, her husband, in the visitors' gallery. His face is described as white and as tight as, and the source just cuts the thought off, but you can feel it. This silent communication passes between them. One last desperate look.
And she's taken down, she's waiting in the cell, clutching this chipped enameled cup of water, and she's fully expecting him to visit, to say goodbye, to tell her what he's going to do with the children.
And then the policewoman comes back. Alone. The sources just describe this moment of silence before the officer speaks.
It's awful.
The officer says, "Baxter, I'm sorry, but your husband doesn't wish to see you." Miriam just pushes, "Why?" But the officer genuinely doesn't know. She just offers this hollow, consolation that maybe he'll visit her when she's moved to Holloway.
He never did. And this is the profound pivot point. The 12-month sentence confirms the physical ordeal, sure. But Raymond's immediate, silent, brutal abandonment, it opens up what she calls the awful possibility of an endless future.
It's a complete dissolution of the self. She realizes her entire support system, her identity as a wife, it's just gone. Instantly.
It's the ultimate betrayal. The very person whose neglect and decline led her to the crime in the first place is the first one to desert her.
Wow. Yeah. That confirmation of being utterly alone in the face of this 12-month ordeal, that is the start of the real psychological damage.
And that psychological shock, it doesn't even have time to settle in because she is immediately transported. The journey to Holloway begins in the infamous police van, the Black Maria.
We should pause on that name. Where does Black Maria come from?
It's a great question. It actually originated in 19th century Boston. It was named after a formidable a black lodging housekeeper named Maria Lee, who apparently often helped the police subdue rowdy individuals. It's just a piece of historical trivia that adds another layer of grimness to the whole journey.
So she's locked in a small, secure cubicle inside this van in the dark, and it's late when they finally get to Holloway. And she catches her first glimpse of the prison, a massive red brick Victorian structure that she immediately sees as towering and imposing. She says it looks like a white and heavily fortified castle.
And we really need to understand the architecture here. Victorian prison design, like Holloway's, was deliberately intimidating. These places were meant to convey the absolute unyielding power of the state.
It looks like a castle because it's designed to keep the outside world out.
And to crush the individual within. Exactly. That sense of scale is part of the punishment.
Once inside, the reception process is just meticulously designed to strip away your identity, your individuality. She's locked instantly into a tiny cubicle in the intake area with wire netting overhead, and she's listening to another girl softly crying nearby.
The walls are already defaced with graffiti, names, dirt. It's a total sensory assault of confinement.
And this is where the cold bureaucracy begins.
Yep. She's led to an office for indoctrination. A wardress just reads from a sheet, collecting every possible detail. Occupation, religion, marital status, children, the magistrate who committed her, the exact offense, sentence length, expiration date. You are literally reduced from a human being to a collection of data points on a piece of paper.
Then comes the physical examination, which is described with just shocking detail and a total lack of human dignity. It's done with minimal conversation. Hair, armpits, vaginal area, chest sounded. Notes are taken of every single scar or wound.
This is a crucial step in that institutional process. It's not just for health, it's dehumanization. It establishes right away that her body is no longer her own. Privacy is just a forgotten concept.
And her identity is finalized. It's reduced to a number, 5678.
She's issued her uniform, a long white garment, which is noted as being dirty and clearly used by others, and worn shoes. But she does get her brown-framed spectacles back.
Along with a card. Her name, her number, the court, and the sentence length, and that little red tie.
The red tie is important. The sources clarify this early on. It marks her as a first-time offender.
And later she'll learn what that really means, right? A blue tie meant you were a recidivist. The system had already failed multiple times.
Exactly. The red tie offered this faintest sliver of hope that maybe the staff might treat you slightly differently.
Then she sees it, the architectural heart of Holloway. The center. This is where the four great wings converge. She sees 4 tiers of landings, cell doors everywhere, this incredibly high roof, and immediately the iron staircase.
And this is where she has this immediate, horrific realization. She notices the tight wire netting slung between the floors.
And she knows instantly why it's there.
Instantly. That architecture, influenced by the panopticon model, is supposed to allow visibility, but those nets, they're a grim acknowledgement of the suicide risk that is just inherent in this system.
And the smell? She describes it as a vinegary scent, a combination of extremely strong disinfectant and this omnipresent stale odor of confinement and unwashed bodies, which she calls foot odor.
It's the unique, sickening smell of institutional life.
She's finally placed in D wing, first floor. The cell is impossibly small, barely wide enough for her to fully extend her arms. The furnishings are sparse. A chair, a table, a slop pail, a copy of the prison rolls.
And crucially, child-sized, blunt, unbreakable cutlery. Everything is designed to prevent self-harm or weaponization.
The rules just codified her isolation. A 20-minute bath once a week, visits and letters only after 3 months. But for Miriam, who came from this noisy, busy 2-child household, the profound shock was the moment that heavy white cell door shut and the lock turned.
She describes that metallic thunk as leaving her utterly alone, a sensation she had genuinely never experienced for more than 5 minutes in her adult life.
The silence was immediate and crushing. It was the first time she had to face the reality of herself without the distraction of children or a husband or work.
And that internal silence becomes the new enemy, the thing she has to fight every single minute of the next 8 months.
It's the enforced internal monologue, isn't it? When you strip away every external distraction, you're left entirely with your guilt, your failures, and your anxiety about the future. That's a sophisticated kind of psychological torture.
It is. Once the routine starts, life revolves around the schedule and the truly revolting food.
Lumpy porridge, thick bread, and bitter tea or cocoa.
And the meals were delivered by these beefy-looking prisoners who wore red bands on their arms, which indicated they were trustees, prisoners who were given privileged positions to serve food or clean.
The food wasn't just unpleasant. It was a psychological reminder of her low status, wasn't it? Dumped onto her plate, served without any care, just fuel.
Purely fuel. And survival in this environment demanded finding some points of connection to counteract that isolation. And Miriam finds these connections while queuing on the ground floor.
She meets Eva Lewis.
Sure.
Young, only about 18, and terrified, also sporting the red tie. Her crime, 5 years for hitting her boyfriend with a brick.
And when Miriam asks her, why such an extreme reaction, Eva's reply just encapsulates the despair of domestic violence. She says, "Because he was a bastard to me, now I've got what I deserve."
Wow. That sense of internalized blame is overwhelming.
Then there's the veteran presence, Rafa. She's older, with a blue tie, a confirmed recidivist serving 3 years. Rafa is the cynical survivor. She's the one who dispenses the unwritten rules of Holloway.
She's the one who says, doesn't do to talk about why we were in here. Best keep your nose clean.
Her motto, balls to the lot of them, fuck 'em,
Yeah.
is her way of just rejecting the institutional attempt to break her spirit.
Let's talk about those ties for a second. We know red means first-timer and blue means returner. Did this actually affect day-to-day life? Did wardresses treat the blue ties worse?
Oh, absolutely. The wardresses were far less sympathetic to the blue ties. The system viewed first-timers like Miriam as potentially salvageable, so they had access to slightly better work assignments or more attention from welfare workers.
And the blue ties?
They were seen as failures of the system. They were often relegated to the most monotonous or the hardest cleaning tasks, and they were subject to stricter discipline because they knew the rules and were expected to follow them. And they often formed their own, more hardened subcultures, like Rafa's.
Speaking of hardened subcultures, we meet Tracy, Lucky Bigger.
Tracy is the alpha figure. 32 but weathered, serving 30 months for soliciting and assaulting a policeman. She's physically imposing, wide-shouldered, tall, missing front teeth, and she's a chameleon who knows exactly how to navigate the prison's power structure.
And she's in a relationship with Amelia, a young French woman serving 2 years for check fraud.
And Miriam, who comes from this very strict traditional background, is simultaneously disturbed and completely fascinated by the frankness of the relationships she's seeing. This environment is forcing her to confront realities she previously only knew existed, vaguely in novels or gossip.
Miriam gets assigned to the top workroom, sewing collars. She's an excellent seamstress, which she found oddly comforting. But the enforced silence is a real struggle. You can hear the constant whispering and gossip. That's the prison's true news source.
And this is where the conflict with Tracy starts. When Tracy catches Miriam looking at her, she just snaps, "What you staring at? Squirt!" The hierarchy is established immediately.
But there is kindness. It provides a necessary counterbalance to the hostility. The chaplain, for example, offers her classes local history, dressmaking, infant welfare.
These are subtle interventions, right? They're designed to keep her out longer from the psychological confines of her cell.
And the deputy governor, Mary Size, provides an even rarer moment of genuine human kindness. She interviews Miriam privately, acknowledging that red tie. She gives her this encouraging smile and says, "Look after yourself, Mrs. Baxter. Learn the rules and keep out of mischief, and the months will fly past."
That simple human acknowledgement is incredibly powerful in an environment that's designed to extinguish your humanity.
But just as she starts to get these small supports in place, the ultimate destructive blow lands. It's in her 3rd week. It's Raymond's letter.
Short, harsh, and completely unforgiving.
He writes that he is astonished by her devilry and declares she is not fit to be their mother anymore. But the line that just shatters her is the horrifyingly ambiguous one about the children.
"I will put the children out, for you don't deserve them."
What does that even mean? Does put them out mean adoption, abandonment, foster care?
Her mind immediately goes to the worst possible place, that Peter and Mary will be left on the street. The panic is total.
She has a violent breakdown. She attacks the iron bars of her window, shouting that she has to save her children. This is just a moment of pure, desperate maternal panic.
And the immediate result is her being subdued, placed on a stretcher, and transferred to the hospital ward. She's briefly unconscious with a syringe mark on her arm. The only way for her overwhelmed emotions to be contained was through sedation.
But it's important to note the immediate intervention that follows, right?
Yes. The chaplain is the one who brings the critical context. Raymond's threat was hollow. It was just cruel. The authorities, specifically the welfare services, had already moved to secure the children safely with Miriam's mother and father in Stratford.
So she realizes 2 things almost at the same time. The depths of Raymond's cruelty and the immediate surprising safety provided by the institutional structure. It's the system protecting her children from the very person she married.
And that realization, even though it came through trauma, it begins the slow process of her accepting that her future might not include Raymond at all.
We mentioned earlier that Raymond's decline and betrayal were the root cause of Miriam's desperation. So to really understand why she risked everything for 7 shillings, we have to look closely at the medical event that fundamentally altered her family and her husband's personality.
This deep dive into her family history is so crucial. Their early life was completely stable. They had a loving honeymoon, a stable home in Layton 22 Calderon Road, a 3-bedroom terrace. Miriam was into her hobbies, bird watching, gardening.
And Raymond was hardworking. He started at the London Electricity Board, the LEB, at the tender age of 14.
He was so fundamentally decent that he actually changed departments simply because he couldn't stand the constant swearing in his original team.
Wow.
He transferred to laying high-tension cables and worked his way up to electrician first grade, which boosted their wages significantly. They were, by all accounts, on the up and up.
And then, the catastrophic accident in the spring of 1937. Raymond was digging a trench, filling in for a sick colleague, when he was hit by a massive 22,000-volt surge from a transformer leakage.
The details from the sources here are just horrifyingly tactile. His colleague, Cocky, describes a flash far brighter than the sun, followed by this distinct whooshing electrical scream.
Raymond was left literally smoking, his clothes scattered, his hair completely gone, the digging fork he was holding. One prong had entirely vaporized, and the others were melted down to half their length.
That is the sheer, overwhelming power of electricity hitting a human body.
The physical recovery was slow, but the neurological damage was immediate and permanent. He experienced severe, significant memory loss. He claimed he had no recollection of his marriage, their honeymoon.
Many of the foundational family events. And more concerningly, his personality just warped. The once decent, hard-working man developed this host of debilitating new habits. Chain smoking, excessive gambling, a volatile temper.
He started raising his fist toward Miriam, always stopping short of hitting her, but the threat was constant. It turned their home into this unstable, terrifying place.
And we need to analyze this from the 1930s medical perspective. While we now understand that high-voltage electrical shocks can cause massive neurological disruption, leading to personality changes, memory gaps, psychological instability, often mimicking a traumatic brain injury.
Their understanding then was rudimentary.
Exactly. He was likely treated primarily for burns and physical trauma, while the deep personality shift was dismissed as shell shock or even just a moral failure.
Which means the LEB probably provided very little in the way of proper disability or psychological support.
Very little. So when Mary, their second child, was born, the financial strain was immense. Raymond's work ethic had just evaporated. He was taking days off constantly, which meant minimal wages.
And this is the critical juncture. Miriam's mother, who was a tough, pragmatic woman, saw the financial precipice they were on and suggested the only way out. Miriam had to go back to work.
And that reluctantly accepted job at Pither's Bakery, necessitated by Raymond's failure to provide, led directly to the scheme involving Peter.
So when the magistrate condemned her for moral failure and disrespecting her son's love, he was operating with absolutely zero context.
None whatsoever. The crime wasn't driven by malice or inherent devilry, as Raymond claimed. It was the direct, desperate consequence of a brain-damaged husband and a completely inadequate social safety net. It was survival. Understanding Raymond's decline is essential to understanding Miriam's eventual resilience.
Miriam's story takes a subtle but really significant turn, which proves that even in a brutal institutional environment, character and decency can matter. And this shift began one morning completely by chance.
It did. She was walking on one of the landings when she discovered Wardress Forster. The wardress had fallen down a flight of stone stairs and was severely injured, unconscious, bleeding, lying awkwardly.
And Miriam's reaction was immediate and calm. She just ran for help, not pausing for even a second.
The deputy governor, the kindly Mary Size, later reflected on this incident. And she noted that in that moment, with the wardress unconscious and vulnerable, other prisoners, the blue ties perhaps, might have seized the opportunity to steal keys or possessions or even flee.
But she said that Miriam wouldn't have even thought of that.
Her instinct was purely altruistic.
And this act had profound consequences. The governor, recognizing Miriam's genuine integrity, wrote a letter of commendation. This was a rare official document acknowledging a prisoner's exceptional behavior.
And this commendation was the first piece of real leverage Miriam had. It granted her an earlier visit from Miss Wood of the DPAS, the Discharged Prisoners Aid Society.
We should probably pause and explain the DPAS. For a modern listener, what was it? Was it a government agency or a charity?
It was primarily a charitable organization, though it often worked hand in glove with the Home Office and prison authorities. Their mission was crucial, to help inmates transition back into society upon release. This meant helping them find accommodation, employment, and, crucially for Miriam, dealing with legal issues involving children and property. They were the lifeline to the outside world.
And Miss Wood's first priority was addressing Raymond's terrifying threat and securing the children's custody.
She confirmed that Miriam's father had hired a solicitor, though Miss Wood candidly admitted the lawyer was largely unnecessary. In short-term incarceration cases like this, the courts almost always favored immediate family custody over an absent, threatening father.
But the governor's letter provided indispensable moral leverage during the court proceedings.
It did. The court ultimately ruled that custody of Peter and Mary would remain with the grandparents, citing Raymond's documented desertion and Miriam's short sentence. This removed Miriam's greatest source of anxiety. That intense, paralyzing fear that drove her breakdown was finally lifted.
That is a huge turning point. Yeah. The system, which took her freedom, ironically also saved her children from Raymond.
Precisely. And the commendation led to a second major change, a promotion. Miriam was transferred from the dreary general workroom to the library, which was in the D-wing basement.
This wasn't just a new job. It was a position of trust, normally reserved for the most reliable long-term inmates. It elevated her above the daily drudgery and hostility of figures like Tracy.
And her new colleague was Peggy, a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying figure. She's white-haired, toothless except for one black pointed tooth, and had been in Holloway since 1919. She was serving a 12-year sentence for manslaughter.
Wow.
Peggy was physically hampered by an old hip injury, but she possessed this almost encyclopedic, macabre knowledge of Holloway's history. Peggy represents the institutional memory of the prison.
And this library job gives Miriam an entirely new perspective. She's no longer just confined to the first-timers in DX Wing. She has to push her cart around all 5 wings, gaining access and exposure to the full spectrum of Holloway's population.
Which dramatically expands her education in the system's extremes.
The library job is a masterclass in the full scope of criminality and tragedy that Holloway contained. The first-timers in DX Wing were mostly desperate, like Miriam and Eva. The other wings, however, they revealed truly hardened individuals.
We see the politically hardened. One day, Miriam sees the arrival of 2 small Irish women. They're surrounded by 4 wardresses, and they're wearing handcuffs, a level of security rarely seen for non-capital offenses.
And through gossip, Miriam learns they are IRA bombers, responsible for a recent explosion in London.
What's so chilling about them is their composure. They show absolutely no fear, no despair, only cold pride and disdain for the wardresses and the other inmates.
And despite the severity of the political terrorism they committed, they wear red ties.
That red tie detail is fascinating, isn't it? It indicates that legally, this was their first criminal conviction in the UK, even if they were seasoned political operators. They saw themselves as soldiers, not criminals, and their demeanor reflected that. Miriam just shivers, realizing the cold, calculated violence they were capable of, a far cry from her 7 shillings of bread.
Then there's the deeply disturbed end of the spectrum. Akina Kobayashi, a young woman of Japanese origin, arrives. She was sentenced to 2 years for poisoning a customer who made advances in her father's cafe.
Her fear upon entry is palpable. She has a terrifying breakdown, refusing to process, draping her belongings, and just screaming in her native language.
She was a cultural outsider, completely isolated, and her initial fear led to this brutal physical subjugation by the wardresses. Miriam sees her later bruised, silent, and with her hair cut raggedly.
And this wasn't necessarily punishment. Sometimes this extreme haircut was done for sanitation or to prevent the spread of lice, but it served as another horrific form of dehumanization. It left her silently angry and deeply traumatized.
But the most profoundly disturbing encounter comes courtesy of Peggy, the historian of the annex at the end of B-Wing, the former hanging shed.
This is where we need to slow down. Holloway, despite being a women's prison, carried this gruesome history. Peggy takes Miriam to this dilapidated, creepy annex, described as a structure that was hastily tacked on. It was deathly silent and noticeably cold.
The gallows apparatus remained. The vertical beams, the cross beam, the lever, and the recessed trapdoor in the floor.
Peggy uses this place to connect Miriam to the prison's deeper, darker past. She remembers the last hanging Nagara, a girl named Edith, 15 or 16 years earlier, who was actually jeered by a crowd outside the gates during her execution.
That juxtaposition of institutional solemnity and public bloodlust, even for a young woman, it tells you everything about the societal attitude toward crime and punishment in the early 20th century.
But the true horror lies on the floor below.
Miriam notices this unusual drain on the lower level of the shed. When she asks Peggy about it, Peggy doesn't even need to elaborate. Her macabre explanation implies its explicit, horrifying purpose.
The drain was there for the bodily fluids associated with the execution.
That detail is the most visceral connection to death in the sources. It takes the abstract concept of state-sanctioned execution and makes it horrifically real and physical. It fills Miriam with this profound terror, realizing that this is the extreme end of the system she is currently trapped within. It's an absolute, tangible warning.
And the brutal system soon claims a life Miriam knew. Eva Lewis, the young girl who hit her boyfriend with a brick, grew increasingly withdrawn.
Miriam notices Eva's uniform blue dress getting tighter and realizes the heartbreaking truth. Eva is pregnant, the result of the assault by the man she attacked.
Eva reveals the final crushing blow. Her parents, who were deeply involved in a charitable organization, had disowned her completely. They viewed her pregnancy and incarceration as an irreparable disgrace.
They plan to arrange for the baby to be adopted immediately upon Eva's release. Eva feels she has nothing left. She tells Miriam she will be childless and parentless if she ever gets out.
Miriam sat with her, held her hand, tried to offer hope and comfort, but Eva responded by saying she felt clearer now that she knew her future.
That statement, in hindsight, is just terrifying.
The next morning, the wardress who unlocked Eva's cell screamed. Miriam was pulled away quickly, but she saw Eva's body. She had committed suicide by hanging herself with a piece of sheet attached to an iron bar in her cell.
Miriam's only reaction, in her shock and guilt, was a momentary curse. Fucking hell.
The tragedy led to a lockdown and later an inquest where Miriam was questioned. But this incident is a severe indictment of the system's medical and mental health care in 1939. Eva's distress was visible. Her shame and despair were palpable.
She had a known pregnancy resulting from trauma, and she was disowned. This was a foreseeable tragedy that the system, focused only on control and order, failed entirely to prevent.
The fact that the prison system allowed a vulnerable, pregnant young woman to reach that point just highlights its structural failures and its complete lack of preventative care.
The narrative then accelerates as Miriam enters her final weeks, and she finds herself a victim of the very prison politics she had tried so hard to avoid. She refuses to pass a contraband note for Amelia, Gracie's partner.
And Amelia retaliates, savagely and immediately. She accuses Miriam of sexual assault and fakes a serious injury, claiming considerable damage to her hand.
And the rules of prison life dictate that accusations, especially involving violence or sexuality, must be taken seriously, regardless of the evidence.
Miriam is instantly thrown into the strips. We need to understand what this means. She is put into the padded, cold segregation cell, facing the terrifying prospect of losing her remission and having her release delayed.
After working so hard for that early discharge,
The strips, or segregation cells, were the ultimate form of discipline. They were padded not for comfort, but to prevent inmates from harming themselves by banging their heads on the stone walls, which was a common behavior in extreme stress.
so they were colder and darker than regular cells. An inmate could be held there for days or weeks.
The psychological terror is profound. Enforced sensory deprivation, absolute isolation, and the threat of losing everything you had earned.
She faces this agonizing choice. Uphold the unwritten prison code, which says never snitch or inform on another inmate, or risk preserving her freedom by exposing Amelia's lie.
The governor, despite Amelia's damaged hand, is skeptical. He notes that the injury could have been self-inflicted. Prison staff were familiar with this tactic, but the rules still required a hearing.
And the resolution arrives from the most unexpected quarter. Akina Kobayashi, the deeply traumatized, non-English-speaking Japanese woman Miriam saw subdued months earlier, steps forward as a witness.
The senior wardress later confirms to Miriam that Akina, who barely spoke a coherent word of English, managed to communicate that she saw Amelia punching a wall repeatedly.
This unforeseen intervention, a silent, traumatized woman finding her voice to defend an inmate who had shown her momentary kindness, it's extraordinarily powerful.
It is. The charge is immediately dropped. It's the ultimate payoff of the golden rule that Miss Wood had mentioned to her. What goes around, comes around. Miriam's simple decency earlier in her sentence saved her freedom at the very end.
So Miriam served 8 months, receiving her remission for good behavior. The day of release arrives. Friday, September 1st, 1939, she is handed her total savings, 14 shillings and 9 pence.
14 shillings and 9 pence.
As she observes the women being discharged, she notes this universal psychological phenomenon, the Holloway mask. Even wearing their own clothes and facing freedom, they look reticent and emotionless.
An expression of resignation. They have adapted so completely to the ordered brutality of institutional life that the vast, chaotic freedom of the outside world is now terrifyingly unknown.
And the outside world immediately intrudes in the most dramatic way possible. Miriam is issued a gas mask. It's mandatory. The world is on war alert.
Leaving the gate, the sensory overload is total, the roar of traffic, the noise, the sheer volume of humanity. She asks a man for directions, and his gruff voice sounds like that of a creature from another planet. She had forgotten what normal, uninstitutionalized men sounded like.
And the immediate realization hits her. The world had moved on. Britain was preparing for imminent war.
She finds a small working man's cafe. She sits alone drinking coffee, which she describes as delicious, and just reflects on the dark reality. The house is lost. Divorce is inevitable, and it brings shame. She needs money desperately.
And she is now a branded thief stepping into a future complicated by a looming global conflict.
The awful certainty of the cell, the guaranteed food, the clear rules, the absence of personal financial stress, that's all gone. It's replaced by the terrifying uncertainty of a world on the brink of collapse. She's physically free, but the war means society itself is dissolving into chaos.
So Miriam steps out of Holloway's confines and into the war alert chaos of London on September 1st, 1939. She's physically free, but she carries the indelible psychological mark of 8 months in a brutal system.
This deep dive into her year really reveals the core paradox of incarceration, that institutional life, though cruel, provides a brutal order and certainty that can be, in a strange way, deeply comforting.
The challenge for Miriam, and for all those released, is reclaiming agency and self-reliance when the outside world offers no guarantees whatsoever.
And her personal tragedy intersects directly with the tragedies of those she met.
Think about the real human costs. Eva's body was collected by her estranged uncle. Her parents never showed. Gert, the Liverpool woman with PB, was released in 1942, only to find that her entire family had been killed in the devastating December 1940 Liverpool bombing raids.
She died shortly after, just consumed by grief and illness.
Even the staff weren't immune. Wardress Kathy Forster, whose life Miriam saved, took early retirement, but years later she lost her legs in a drink-driving accident. The system touches everyone.
But there are also these rays of surprising light and redemption. The most surprising fate belonged to Akina Kobayashi, the silent, traumatized inmate.
Upon her release in 1941, the DPAS, recognizing her unique skill set for focus and discipline, successfully installed her in the Women's Air Force.
Akina ultimately specialized in analyzing reconnaissance, photography, finding purpose, and vital service in the war effort. Her ability to spot tiny details became a national asset.
Miriam's survival hinged on unexpected moments of kindness, from Miss Wood, the deputy governor, and the profound silent justice delivered by Akina. She leaves Holloway physically defined by her time as a thief, but spiritually defined by her decency.
And the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, reflecting on Miriam's ordeal, is this. When the cage door finally opens and you step back into a world that's dissolving into global conflict, what does true freedom really mean when the only thing you have lost is the awful, certain order of the cell?